Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are finishing up journal collection number 43, dating from the year 1852, and Emerson was 49 years old. We are up to August 1st of that year, but either way, we are making it to the end of the year in this video. So with that said, I'll read the entry for August 1st. Nobody knows what he shall see by going to a brookside or to a ball. At the sawmill brook he might see today, as I saw, a profusion of handsome flowers, among which the Orchis fimbriata, the stately stemmed eupatorium, and the perfiolet, the nola metangere, the mimulus and the thalcatrum, the lobelia cardinalis, the lysimachia, and some of the mint are conspicuous. The oldest naturalist sees something new in every walk. It is the praise of Burns that he made a language classical. Eloquence. Who could convince X of any truth which he does not see, and what truth does he see, must be a master of his art. And eloquence is the power to translate a truth into language perfectly intelligible to the persons to whom you speak. Is this a vulgar power? Declamation is common, but such possession of thought as is here required, such practical chemistry as the conversion of a truth written in God's language into a truth in X's language, is one of the most beautiful and cogent weapons ever forged in the shop of the divine artificer. The charm of the conversation of the old man, who is Odin disguised, who talks with King Olaf in his bed, is well described. Thorpe, Volume 1, page 160. How delicate, difficult, unattainable the golden mean which nature yet knows how to attain of temperament and culture in a young girl's carriage and manners. Here are girls beautiful without beauty, and ugly with it. Birth has much to do with it, and condition much, and society very much, and wealth, and beauty, and tradition, and connection are all elements. But no rules can be given, and the hazards are so great that the status and métier of a young girl from 14 to 25 are beforehand pathetically perilous. On her theory of the authorship of the quote-unquote plays, my correspondent Miss Bacon says, and says excellently well, you see yourself how much this idea of the authorship controls our appreciation of the works themselves, and what new worlds such an authorship would enable us to see in them. What in such a tide of time as that could Bacon do? He had made one attempt to be noble to himself, and the consequence was that without gaining anything for himself or others, he had brought for a time into mortal peril the life hopes so infinitely sweet to him, and thenceforth he took to himself other weapons than truth and eloquence, uncompromising submission, indefatigable perseverance, patience that knew no limit, sycophancy, or rather a secret mockery of it, smiling to itself sacrifices of all kinds, were henceforth the instruments of this lifelong warfare. In all this there was a perpetual mental reservation, and according to my theory, by means of his ingenious instrument, a solemn protest also perpetually set down by shining aerials on margins that will yet give out their colors. Through all this there was something that still sat within, in purple, crowned, unbending, that never stooped or wavered, smiling to see its high charms work. Good neighborhood. Neighborhood is of great importance, and you buy much with given prices that is not rightly rendered in the bill. You pay nominally for one thing, you buy really something worth incomparably more. Also, every man who plants an estate must buy good tenants as well as good land, buy a tutor or other respectability to dine with, buy companions for his children, and avoid misfits. I waked at night and bemoaned myself, because I had not thrown myself into this deplorable question of slavery, which seems to want nothing so much as a few assured voices. But then in hours of sanity I recover myself and say, God must govern his own world and know his way out of this pit without my desertion of my post, which has none to guard it but me. I have quite other slaves to free than these negroes, to wit, imprisoned spirits, imprisoned thoughts, far back in the brain of man, far retired in the heaven of invention, and which, important to the republic of man, I have no watchman, or lover, or defender but I. In July, Mr. Alcott went to Connecticut to his native town of Walcott, found his father's farm in possession of a stranger, found many of his cousins still poor farmers in the town itself unchanged since his childhood, whilst all the country round has been changed by manufacturers and railroads. Wolcott, which is a mountain, remains as it was, or with a still less population. $10,000, he said, would buy the whole town and all the men in it, and now tributary entirely to the neighboring town of Waterbury, which is a thriving factory village. Alcott went about and invited all the people, his relatives and friends, to meet him at 5 o'clock at the schoolhouse where he had once learned on Sunday evening. Thither they all came, and he sat at the desk and gave them the story of his life. Some of the audience went away discontented because they had not heard a sermon as they hoped. I read England as It Is by Johnston with interest. It is acute, learned, informed. What is said of England, every particular, we Americans read with a secret interest, even when Americans are expressly, and it may seem on good grounds, affronted and disparaged, for we know that we are the heir, that not he who is meant to be praised is the Englishman, but we are the Englishmen by gravitation, by destiny, and laws of the universe. The good he praises is devolving to us, and our keen sympathy in every trait he draws is the best certificate that we are the lawful son. Quote, Percy is but the factor, good my lord. Yet I think the final lesson taught by the book is that outside of all the plausibilities collected by the writer and Wordsworth and Coleridge and Burke and the total Aristopism of the world in behalf of the Church and State of England, we must rally to the stoical banner, to the geometric astronomic morals. August 18th. Horatio Greenough, lately returned from Italy, came here and spent the day. An extraordinary man, a man of sense, of virtue, and of rare elevation of thought and carriage. One thought of heroes, of Alfieri, of Michelangelo, of Leonardo da Vinci. How old? 47 years of joy I have lived, was his answer. He makes many of my accustomed stars pale by his clear light. His magnanimity, his idea of a great man, his courage and cheer and self-reliance and depth and self-derived knowledge charmed and invigorated me as none has, who has gone by these many months. I told him I would fight in his regiment, the grandest of democrats. His democracy is very deep and for the most part free from clichés, not quite, and philosophical. He finds everybody believer in two gods, believer in the devil. He is not. Again, everything is generative and everything connected. If you take chastity apart and make chastity a virtue, you create that sink of obscenity, a monk. The old ages, seeing that circumstances pinched them, and they got no divine man, tried to lift up one of their number out of the press, and so gain a right man. But it turned out that the new development really obtained was abnormal. They got a bloated belly. Then they tried to take 20 or 50 out and see if they could do better so. But no, instead of one huge kingly paunch, they got 20 or 50 with a round belly. The whole theory has been, out of a prostrate humanity, as if out of a bank in a magazine, to draw the materials for culture to a class. All a lie, and had the effect of a lie. Take religion out, and make religion separate. Still a lie and ruin. 'Tis all experimenting on nature. Whenever there is a wrong, the response is pain. The rowdy eyes that glare on you from the mob say plainly that they feel that you are doing them to death. You you have got the chain somewhere round their limbs, and though they know not how, war, internecine war, to the knife is between us and you. Your 6% is as deadly a weapon as the old knife and tomahawk. In the old Egyptian and in the Middle Age architecture, he sees only, quote, cost to the constituency, and, quote, prodigious toil of prostrate humanity. In the Greek alone, beauty. His idea of beauty is 1. The true profit of function, and just as far as function is preparing, beauty will appear. Then, 2. In action, the preserved function, the whole is resolved into 3. Character, the record of function. But everything of beauty, for beauty's sake, is embellishment, non-functional embellishment, that is false, childless, and moribund. He complains of England that it never did or can look at art otherwise than as a commodity it can buy. Of England he thinks ill. Its tactics is to live a jour à la journée, perpetual makeshifts. August. Our 4 powerful men in the virtuous class in this country are Horace Greeley, Theodore Parker, Henry Ward Beecher, and Horace Mann. We have our 3 or 4 Horatii, Horace Greeley, Horace Mann, Horace Bushnell, Horatio Greenough. The English nation never flowered into their own religion, but borrowed this Hebraism. They don't know where he got it, but the king set it finely into them, and they are as happy as, sentence unfinished, English transitional, Greek oriental, full of fate. I find that the Americans have no passions, they have appetites. Poetry is the only verity. Wordsworth said of his ode it was poetry, that he did not know it was the only truth. Poet sees the stars because he makes them. Perception makes. We can only see what we make. All our desires are procreant. Perception has a destiny. I notice that all poetry comes or all becomes poetry when we look from within and are using all as if the mind made it. It is cheap and easy to destroy. There is not a joyful boy or an innocent girl, buoyant with fine purposes of duty, in all the street of rosy faces, but a cynic can dull and dishearten. In Sir Philip Sidney's time, it was held as great a disgrace for a young gentleman to be seen riding in the streets in a coach as it would now to be seen in a petticoat. Aubrey. 3, page 554. Modern criticism is plainly coming to look on literature and arts as parts of history, that is, as growths. But Hume looked steadily at the chronicle of the reigning family and called it the history of England, did not look at the British mythology, poetry, philosophy, did not see what was agreeable to the British mind and what was disgusting to it. But now calico has come to be an element of English history, calico. When the elder Peel spoke in Parliament, they considered this man employs 15,000 men and pays £40,000 to the excise on printed goods. The life of Peel contains, very appropriately, in the first pages, a picture of the spinning jenny as a life of a Plantagenet would a battle-axe, or Downing's a loaded pear tree. In Peel's life the trait is dullness, and the result is that England resolves itself best nowadays into a dull man. Good man, rich man, creditable speaker, well educated, all these indispensable, but no genius. I believe a double first at Oxford. Quote, aliens in language, religion, and blood, end quote, was Lord Lyndhurst's unfortunate phrase concerning the Irish, which made the strength of the Repeal Association. Pedantry. Don't ride because Montaigne rode, nor fish because Walton fished, nor build because Ward told you how fine it was, nor collect books after reading Dibdin, nor coins and antiques after Winckelmann, nor let your gardening grow from Evelyn's Esoteria. Let your elevation make you courteous, else your courtesy is paint and varnish. The Democrats are good-humored. The Whigs are angry because the Democrat has really the safe and broad ground. Let your zeal for freedom proceed from the grounds of character and insight, and you can afford a courtesy which Webster cannot afford. Say nothing, and your greeting and shaking of hands impress your occurrent with just your weight and equality. But what you say, if artificially got up for the moment, weakens your impression. Let the superlative come from depth of thought, and all is right. Material greatness captivates the vulgar, and egoists live in nervous exaggeration, as when a man sits under the dentist, he fancies his teeth have some acres of extent, but to show, in that thing he happens to be doing, grandeur by acting simply, newly, and beautifully, and setting that act high in men's imaginations, is the right superlative. Quote, Molière, the implacable enemy of all exaggeration. Cousin. Club. Of Thomas Hobbes, Aubrey says, quote, I have heard him say that in my lord's house in Derbyshire there was a good library, and books enough for him, and his lordship stored the library with what books he thought fit to be bought. But, he said, the want of good conversation was a very great inconvenience, and that though he conceived he could order his thinking as well as another, yet he found a great defect. Methinks in the country in long time, for want of good conversation, one's understanding and invention grow mouldy. Volume 3, page 610. If you take in a lie, you must take in all that belongs to it. England takes in this neat national church, and it glazes their eyes and bloats the flesh, and deforms and debilitates, and translates the nervous young England so far into false, magisterial old Polonius. My Westminster man on Hakluyt thinks the English of Elizabeth's time were truly represented in the noble portraits of Shakespeare. The silence on Shakespeare of the same community that was so marked in its admiring reception of Bacon is unexplained except by the English idolatry of rank. Editor's note. Here follow many interesting quotations from Fuller's Worthies of England. Truth of English names. Buckingham from Buchan, Saxon for beaches. Exeter, ex castra. Wilton, Willie River. Ashwell, a fountain among the trees. Trade. Quote, a lapidary to be rich must buy of those who go to be executed, and sell to those who go to be married. October. Mr. S. Prentice of New Orleans first established a new doctrine in Western courts, this namely, that the party attacked in a personal conflict only knows how formidable the assault is, and what extreme means he is justified in using. Also, if I rightly understood Mr. Williams of St. Louis, even before any blow has been struck, and whilst the assaulting party is only uttering injurious words. English brag. I have found that Englishmen have such a good opinion of England that the ordinary phrases of postponing or disparaging one's own things in talking to a stranger are quite seriously mistaken by them for the inevitable praise of their country. In compliment to them the other day, I spoke of Baring as a great merchant. They answered, "Oh, yes, Bates was nobody." And of Russell Sturgis, when I spoke, they said, "What a lucky thing for him, the going to London," etc. Use such words as "not such as England," "in our young country," "poor country," or the like. 'Tis all lost on them. They hear it all as homage to England, and sympathize with you as really unhappy about it. The laws find their root in the credence of the people. A 2-foot stone wall guards my fine pears and melons all summer long from droves of hungry boys and poor men and women. If one of these people should question my right and pluck my fruit, I should set the cumbrous machinery of the law slowly in motion, and by good luck of evidence and counsel I might get my right asserted, and that particular offender daunted. But if every passenger should make the like attempt, though the law were perfect, my house would not be worth living in, nor my fields worth planting. It is the education of these people into the ideas and laws of property, and their loyalty that makes those stones in the low wall so virtuous. October. As sings the pine tree in the wind, so sings in the wind a sprig of the pine. The strength and joy of laughing France are shed into its wine. Footnote: Nature in Liszt's Poems, page 297, this quatrain evidently written in later. Wealth and labor. What earldoms of Guyenne, Champagne, Bourgogne, and a grapestone! What populations, cities, states, arts, arms, colleges, patriotisms, wars, laws, treaties, what haughty manners, tragedies, pride, and poetry! What not less than a cotton seed for Carolina, and a sugar cane for Mississippi, tobacco for Virginia, rice grain for Georgia, peach stone for Jersey. In Massachusetts, every 12th man is a shoemaker. Tea plant for China, oranges for Spain, coal for England, wheat for Canada. What in the unctuous quadruped that drags his larded sides like modest prosperity through the city of Cincinnati? Then the equalizations. Fate, which appears in statistics, exalts races by a cellule in their brain that makes certain families miners and others hunters, and levies her own tariffs by making dreadful boundaries of her own. To these families, forts and violence and hatred of foreigners, inborn dislike of other families, white, red, and olive. Others need no weapon but the sword of their climate to drive off competitors. Others have magnificent fields and watercourses and sunshine, but a limit in the limestone in the waters, which kills every fourth man with ague, cholera, or the stone. We tell our children and ourselves not to regard other people's opinion, but to respect themselves, and we send them to school or to company, and they meet, as we so often met, some animosus infans, some companion rammed with life, whose manners tyrannize over them. They have no weapon of defense against this weapon. A pound will weigh down an ounce in spite of all precepts. A quality of a different kind is yet a counterpoise. Pantheism, to be sure. Do you suppose the pale scholar who says, "You do not know how causes, or the cause of causes, any better for often repeating your stupid noun," deceives himself about his own powers? Does not he live in care and suffer by trifles? Has he not notes to pay? And is he not likely to overestimate his powers of getting johnny cake for his breakfast, because he perceives that you use words without meaning? A Mr. Shod, who printed an orthodox pamphlet lately at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, says that, quote, Mr. Emerson is a pantheist by intuition, rather than by argument, end quote. So it seems our intuitions are mistaken. Who then can get us right? Here's a poem entitled Samuel Hoare. With beams December planets dart, his cold eyes truth and conduct scanned. July was in his sunny heart, October in his liberal hand. The shoemakers and fishermen say in their shops, "Damn learning, it spoils the boy. As soon as he gets a little, he won't work." Yes, answers Lemuel, but there is learning somewhere, and somebody will have it, and who has it will have the power and will rule you. Knowledge is power. Why not then let your son get it as well as another? If I have a message to send, I prefer the telegraph to the wheelbarrow. Certain doctrines appear to be offensive to men in every age, the metamorphosis or passage of souls. Englishmen hate it. It vexes the common sense. Gross materialism, not nearly so much. Then there's a quote in Latin from Persius, which has a translation. Some star, I know not which, surely softens me towards thee. October 25th. At Plymouth I saw the beach under a fine splashing surf. A boy told me he shot all kinds of fowl there, and last night old squaws, but there was such a sea on that he could not, half the time see the birds. Each of the fishing boats is about 70 tons and worth $5,000 or $6,000, and is manned by 8 men. 74 of these vessels go out from Plymouth. Once they went out, every man on his own hook, carrying his own provisions, a little flour, pork, molasses, and rum, and living on fish, and having 3/4 of all he caught, 1/4 being for the ship. Now they are paid from $12 to $30 a month, and manned every year by young men coming down from New Hampshire and Vermont for the green hands, and for the old ones by men that make shoes all winter and want to recruit by going to sea in the spring. Editor's note. Here follow several pages which would seem to be mostly notes of Horatio Greenow's conversation with Mr. Emerson, of which only a few sentences are here given. End note. In England they will not let science be free, not geology without bringing its nose down to their church. The Puritans would not allow anything histrionic, but the light would come into their square houses. The modern England has nothing else but vice, but the light has got excluded. Obedience is worship. As soon as a deviation, for the sake of a variety, for a luxurious variety, is allowed, it is easy to see that the whole race of deprivation will be run. Therefore Greenough will not allow so much as a supporter to a porch to be varied by a parabola instead of a straight line. The adherence of the Greeks to the osseous fabric and to all the geometric necessities enabled them, as soon as plastic ornament was to be attempted, to do it, and to carry into that also geometric truth. In the Elgin marbles, by representing a procession of horsemen, in which, though each part is fixed, yet all the attitudes of the horse are given, the one figure supplies the defects of the other, and you have seen a horse put through all his motions, so that motion is enjoyed, and you can almost see the dust. There is no surface finish. The duties of man are to be measured by the powers of the instrument. Greenough would stop commerce if he could, would insulate the American to stop the foreign influence that denationalizes him. He thought the old artists taught each other, made each other. I suppose that genius always has humility in the presence of genius. But as Mr. Lowell said to me of her girls of fashion, quote, "Those who give themselves airs on no grounds whatever cannot be taught." End quote. Fate, politics. It is easy to see that what is done in this country in state and in trade is the result of the character and condition of the people, and that the difference of the two parties, Whig and Democrat, on the matter is trifling. One party pushing forward and the other holding back, but both irresistibly carried on as by the planet itself. It is the difference of two runners in the same course, one of whom affects to hold his head back, and the other affects to throw his head forward, whilst both are at their speed. On European influence, we might treat the evil of expensiveness. A man values himself on what he can buy, and if you have a house, he buys 2, 3. If you have a horse, he buys 10. Dogs, deer, preserves, liveries, and will not speak to you because you have only one horse. His expense is not his own, but a far-off copy. The church is there for check of trade, but on examination all the deacons, ministers, and saints of this church are steering with all their sermons and prayers in the direction of the trade. If the city says, "Freedom and no tax," they say so and hunt up plenty of texts. But if the city says, "Freedom is a humbug, we prefer a strong government," the pulpit says the same and finds a new set of applicable texts. But presently trade says, "Slavery too has been misunderstood. It is not so bad. Nay, it is good. On the whole, it is the best possible thing." The dear pulpit and deacons must turn over a new leaf and find a new string of texts which they are forward to do, and S, R, and O, D, and M, S, and Park Street and Andover will get up the new march of the hypocrites stood pudding for the occasion. Giants, Napoleons, Cannings, Websters, Kossuths, Burkes are the inevitable patriots until they too wane and their defects and gout and palsy and money warp their politics. Last Sunday I was at Plymouth on the beach, and I looked across the hazy water, whose spray was blowing onto the hills and orchards, to Marshfield. I suppose Webster must have passed, as indeed he died at 3 in the morning. The sea, the rocks, the woods gave no sign that America and the world had lost the completest man. Nature had not in our days, or not since Napoleon, cut out such a masterpiece. He brought the strength of a savage into the height of culture. He was a man in equilibrio, a man within and without, the strong and perfect body of the first ages, with the civility and thought of the last. Os oculasque Jovi par. And what he brought he kept. Cities had not hurt him. He held undiminished the power and terror of his strength, the majesty of his demeanor. He had a counsel in his breast. He was a statesman and not the semblance of one. Most of our statesmen are in their places by luck and vulpine skill, not by any fitness. Webster was there for cause, the reality, the final person who had to answer the questions of all the fainéants and who had an answer. But alas, he was the victim of his ambition. To please the South betrayed the North and was thrown out by both. Webster has been the teacher of the legislators of the country in style and eloquence. Webster, Clay, Everett were imitable models, and have been chosen respectively by each young adventurer according to his own quality. We are under great obligations to Webster for raising the tone of popular addresses out of rant and out of declamation to history and good sense. Mr. Foster says that N. Borden of Fall River told him that Mr. Fowler quoted J.C. Calhoun as saying that, quote, Mr. Webster's 7th of March speech was perfectly satisfactory, only that it was too late, end quote. Mr. Calhoun had taken the Liberator for 18 years. England cannot receive Oken, but nibbles, gnaws, accommodates by Owen and Chambers, cannot receive Goethe's botany, cannot receive geology without bringing down its nose to their church. What mean criticism they brought to bear on Goethe in Edinburgh Review and Blackwood, could not heartily receive Wordsworth or Coleridge. England has no music. England has no art, but buys for pride. England cannot make a pattern for a picture. Previous question. Quote, now you may just as well know that the previous question means. It is that the whole House says, all these things are very true, and we have no answer to make, and therefore the less that's said about the matter, the better. End quote. Mr. Creevey. Abolition. The argument of the slaveholder is one and simple. He pleads fate. Here is an inferior race requiring wardship. It is sentimentality to deny it. The argument of the abolitionist is, it is inhuman to treat a man thus. Then for the Fugitive Slave Bill we say, I do not wish to hold nor to help you to hold them. If you cannot keep them without my help, let them go. Such provisions as you find in the Constitution for your behoof make the most of. You could not recover a load of hay, a barrel of potatoes by such a law. The Constitution has expressly guaranteed your barrel of potatoes. No, the courts would say it has not named them. If it especially and signally wished by compromise to protect your potato crop, it would have said so. Laws are to be strictly interpreted, and laws of all things are understood to say exactly what they mean. But how, then, can you maintain such an incredible and damnable pretension as to steal a man on these loose innuendos of the law that would not allow you to steal his shoes? How, but that all our northern judges have made a cowardly interpretation of the law in favor of the crime and not of the right? The leaning should be, should it not, to the right against the crime. The leaning has been invariably against the slave for the master. But Thoreau remarks that the cause of freedom advances for all the able debaters now are Free Soilers, Sumner, Mann, Giddings, Hale, Seward, Burlingame. The power of generalizing differences men, and it shows the rudeness of our metaphysics that this is not down in the books. The number of successive saltations this nimble thought can make measures the difference between the highest and the lowest of mankind. To write a history of Massachusetts, I confess, is not inviting to an expansive thinker, since from 1790 to 1820 there was not a book, a speech, a conversation, or a thought in the state. About 1820, the Channing, Webster, and Everett era begun, and we have been bookish and poetical and cogitative since. Edwards on the Will was printed in 1754. Omen and coincidence only show the symmetry or rhythmical structure of the man, just as his eye and hand work exactly together, and to hit the mark with a stone, he has only to fasten his eye firmly on the mark, and his arm will swing true. So the main ambition and genius being bestowed in one direction, many lesser spirits and involuntary aids within his sphere will follow. I do not think the fame of Pitt very honorable to English mind, neither Pitt nor Peel. Pitt, as a mediocre man, is only explained by the commanding superiority which a good debater in a town meeting has, and there is not a quotable phrase or word from him or measure. Nothing for man. Mere parliamentary plausibility and dexterity, and the right external conditions, namely, of name, birth, breeding, and relation to persons and parties. Pitt is nothing without his victory. Burke, on the other side, who had no victory, and nothing but defeat and disparagement, is an ornament of the human race. And Fox had essential manliness. His speeches show a man brave, generous, and sufficient, always on the right side. Virility, Agassiz. The Democrats carry the country because they have more virility, just as certain of my neighbors rule our little town, quite legitimately, by having more courage and animal force than those whom they overbear. It is a kind of victory, like that of gravitation over all upraised bodies, sure, though it lie in wait for ages for them. I saw in the cars a broad-featured, unctuous man, fat and plenteous as some successful politician, and pretty soon divined it must be the foreign professor, who has had so marked a success in all our scientific and social circles, having established unquestionable leadership in them all, and it was Agassiz. Uriah Boyden obtains by his hydraulic inventions 96% of the power of a waterfall. The French had only obtained 70%, the English before that only 60%. Lowell Mills at one time paid him $30,000 for the use of his turbines. America exceeds all nations in hydraulic improvements. Ingenuity against cheap labor is our reliance. America lives by its wits. Englishmen cannot travel out of his road. Erastus B. Bigelow is paid by Crossley of Halifax, England, 4 cents on every yard of carpet woven on his looms, and in this country Clinton Company draws 1 cent, and Bigelow 3 cents on every yard woven on his looms throughout America. There is no literature, none in England, none in America, which serves us. The quote-unquote diffusion literature describes the habits of kangaroos, and the English writes novels of society and plenty of critical journals. But who gives high counsels to these twin nations? Who points their duties, admonishes, animates, and holds them up to their highest aim? Wordsworth spoke, Milton-like, to their soul. Carlyle by jerks and screams scolded and sneered. But what high, equal, calm soul held them to their aim? We entreat you not to believe that anything is yet attained. All is in the gristle and preparation. Your commerce is but a costly comfort, ease of life, no more. It belts the world for raisins and oranges, and oil and wine, and gums and drugs, and hides and silk, but what for thought, and what for humanity? Out of 500 ships, Perhaps Herschel, or a botanist, or a philologist buys or begs a cheap charitable passage in one, which goes for quite other designs, and he is reckoned a loafer, perhaps a Jonah. And as we do not want a sentimental or King Rene era, perhaps it is safest so. But is science and the heart always to be merely endured, and tolerated, and never to walk to the quarter-deck and take the command? Are the politics better? And are these legislatures convened with the upheaving of all the peace of nations and the canvass and fury of elections to any noble humane purpose? No, but to the most frivolous and selfish and paltry. Will not nations one day soberly insist that justice shall be done, justice which satisfies everybody, and that grave and adequate ends be prosecuted by their money and their talent? Are we always to be the victims of the meanest of mankind, who kill off as sentimental and visionary every generous and just design? England never stands for the cause of freedom on the continent, but always for her trade. Few and poor chances for European emancipation. The disarming, the army, and the army of office holders are the triple wall of monarchy. Then consider that the people don't want liberty, they want bread. And though republicanism would give them more bread after a year or two, it would not until then, and they want bread every day. Louis Napoleon says, "I will give you work," and they believed him. In America we hold out the same bribe, roast beef and $2 a day, and our people will not go for liberty or of other people, no, nor for their own, but for annexation of territory or a tariff or whatever promises new chances for young men, more money to men of business. In either country they want great men, and the cause of right can only succeed against all this gravitation or materialism by means of immense personalities. But Webster, Calhoun, Clay, Benton are not found to be philanthropists, but attorneys of great and gross interests. November. The Saxons good combiners, and though an idealist always prefers to trace a discovery or a success home to one mind, yet we must acquiesce in 19th century civilization and accept the age of combined working or joint stock companies. I like to hear that Mr. Samuel Lawrence invented the Bay State shawl, which saved the so-called mills when all other manufacturing companies failed. But no, Mr. Lawrence gave the grand project. We must make a shawl, and even brought a pattern shawl to his designer. The designer, named Edward Everett, not of Cambridge but of Lowell, prepared designs. They had an excellent dyer, who could give them fast colors and rich. They had looms, which they could and did adapt to this fabric. But the twisting the fringes would cost 30 cents a shawl. 'Tis too much. So Mr. invented a machine to twist fringes, and putting all these advantages together, they succeeded. Sphinx. 'Tis said that the age ends with the poet or successful man who knots up into himself the genius or idea of his nation, and that when the Jews have at last flowered perfectly into Jesus, there is the end of the nation. When Greece is complete in Plato, Phidias, Pericles, the race is spent and rapidly takes itself away. When Rome has arrived at Caesar and Cicero, it has no more that it can do and retreats. When Italy has got out Dante, all the rest will be rubbish. So that we ought rather to be thankful that our hero or poet does not hasten to be born in America, but still allows us the others to live in a little and warm ourselves at the fire of the sun, for when he comes, we others must pack our petty trunks and be gone. But I say Saxondom is tough and many-headed, and does not so readily admit of absorption and being sucked and vampirized by a representative as fluider races. For have not the English stood Chaucer, stood Shakespeare, and Milton, and Newton, and survived until this day with more diffusion of ability, with a larger number of able gentlemen in all department of work than any nation ever had? Sam Johnson, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Nelson, Wellington had high abilities, and even Byron and Scott showed vivacity. They made these masculine locomotives and spinning mules. Or will you say that the old poets were Norman and Catholic, and that Watt, Fulton, Arkwright, Stevenson, Brunel, Chadwick, and Paxton were the flowering of the Saxon section of this double-headed race? England and America. The English and the Americans cant beyond all other nations. The French relinquish all that nonsense to them. Quote, "The only way to deal with a humbugger is to humbug him." Moore's Diary. It is the distinction of Uncle Tom's Cabin that it is read equally in the parlor and the kitchen and the nursery of every house. What the lady read in the drawing-room in a few hours is retailed to her in the kitchen by the cook and the chambermaid. Week by week they master one scene and character after another. A crown once worn cleareth all defects of title. Napoleon III is bent on his pleasures and scorneth the opinion of the people. The formula of society is that you shall respect the decencies, but he knows they respect self-will more than they do decencies, and he outrages these last. The Compiègne story gives reality, at least, to this fellow, and really brings him nearer to the Roman and Plutarchian characters. He has taste for realities. Editor's note. Here follow many anecdotes taken from Arsène Houssaye, of which but a few are here given. End note. Rivarol said, quote, "This Mirabeau is capable of anything for money, even of a good action." End quote. Boucher found Raphael insipid, Michelangelo an artist of deformity, and nature wanting in harmony and attractiveness. Quote, "Too green, badly managed as to light." End quote. He threw the academy into the shade. He resigned himself to marriage, though he said, quote, marriage was not habitual to him. End quote. Quote, "If the soul is immortal," Lantra must have thought, "mine cannot run any risk of being in a worse place. The taverns and the landscapes of the other world will be curious to examine." End quote. Fontenelle said, quote, "There are three things in the world which I have loved very much, without knowing anything about them: music, painting, and women." End quote. December, with a question mark. You cannot well know the genius unless you know the fool of the family. For the last possesses the dregs of that very quality, by the elixir of which the first achieved his success. Many successes are won by help of insanities. Politicians note this. I remember Tracy told me that he had known men obtain a greater career in politics by some foible or insanity they had. And Governor Reynolds of Illinois said to me that if a man knew anything, he would go hide his head in a corner. But as he does not, he blusters about and thinks he can move the world, and really manages to do wonders. Feats. Sidney Smith really did the feat of causing the state of Pennsylvania to pay its bonds. He flooded the state with his ridicule. Nobody could dodge it. His letters were reprinted all over the state. The jokes were in everybody's mouth. The stiffest repudiators laughed till they split, and at last no men dared go to that legislator until he was prepared to provide for the payment. We must measure England not by its census or money, but by its ability to stand the glance of a wise man, such as passes by perhaps only once in 2 ages. In one age it might have satisfied Lycurgus, in another age Franklin. Would it at any time have contented Socrates? No, but the right measures are the men it actually yielded. Roger Bacon was its monk, sumptuous as the monastic piles that grew with him, but he was born in them, as the weevil is born in the wheat, to destroy them and bring in a higher era. Wickman was an English Pericles. Chaucer was the fruit of the soil. Nothing more genuine in flavor, more sound in health, did it ever bear. The note of each bird is not more proper to its kind than the genius of Chaucer is the right music of Britain. Could its church stand the glances of the realist? Could its science have satisfied him with some admirable benefit? Did they then, as now, blunder into the admirable inventions? Could the social arts and customs have invited him to leave his solitude without self-reproach? Were the Californias of that age found by fugitives or by geologists? There was never anything more excellent came from a human brain than the plays of Shakespeare, bating only that they were plays. The Greek has a real advantage of them in the degree in which his dramas had a religious office. Could the priest look him in the face without blenching? Oh, yes, the faggot was lighted. Yes, the priest translated the Vulgate and translated the sanctities of old hagiology into English virtues on English ground. George Fox and Anthony Parsons and John Bunyan and Prynne. Dr. Kirkland and Professor Brazier mutually resolved one day to break off smoking for 6 months. Soon after that they met at a dinner party at Colonel P.'s, where all the appointments were excellent. Cigars were offered, and Brazier declined them. Dr. Kirkland lighted one, and after smoking with much content for a time, he said to nobody in particular, as he puffed away the smoke, "It is doubtful whether we show more want of self-control in breaking good resolutions, or self-conceit in keeping them." Dr. Channing asked Dr. Hare of Philadelphia why he did not go to church. "Because," answered the doctor, "the ministers take too much for granted." Philadelphia Boys. Mr. William Wistar met a youth at a dinner party who took a cigar. "How old are you?" said Mr. W. 16 years. "You are at school, are you not?" "I am at university." "You are just about as old as my boy. Do you know him?" "Yes," answered the youth, "and I am damned glad to find the breed has improved." Fate. Quote, "The classes and the races too weak to master the new conditions of life must give way." Karl Marx. Walk with Ellery to Lincoln. Benzoin laurus, rich, beautiful shrub on this dried-up country. Party-colored warbler. Ellery laughed at Nuttall's description of birds. Quote, "On the top of a high tree the bird pours all day the lays of affection," etc. Affection? Why, what is it? A few feathers with a hole at one end and a point at the other, and a pair of wings. Affection? Why, just as much affection as there is in that lump of peat. Thoreau at home, why, he has got to maximize the minimum. That will take him some days. We went to Bear Hill and had a fine outlook. Descending, Ellery got sight of some laborers in the field below. "Look at them," he said. "Those four demoniacs scratching in their cell of pain. Live for the hour, just as much as any man has done, or laid up in any way unfits him for conversation. He has done something, makes him good for boys, but spoils him for the hour. That's the good of Thoreau, that he puts his whole sublunary capital into the last quarter of an hour, carries his whole stock under his arm." At home I found Henry himself, who complained of Clough or somebody that he or they recited to everyone at table the paragraph just read by him and by them in the last newspaper, and studiously avoided everything private. I should think he was complaining of one H.D.T. The Countess of Pembroke, quote, "had forecast and aftercast," said Bishop Rainbow. The high poetry is the subduing men to order and virtue. He is the right Orpheus who writes his poetry not with syllables but with men, and Shakespeare's poetry must suffer that deduction that it is an exhibition and amusement, and is not expected to be eaten and drunk as the bread of life by the people. But Ossian's and Talison's and Regnar's and Isaiah's is. John Quincy Adams was asked the result of his experience for the preservation of his health and faculties in old age. He said he owed everything to 3 rules: regularity, regularity, regularity. English university men are thoroughbred scholars, full readers, by no means idlers, hypercritical, no error can pass under their notice. Learning, accurate, armed, good sense, is cheap. Hence the excellence of their paragraphs, leaders and review articles, and the no wonder that follows. Wordsworth, Coleridge, Tennyson, Carlyle, and Macaulay cannot be matched in America. Judge of the splendor of a nation by the insignificance of great individuals in it, and see what culture appears in the article on architecture in North British Edinburgh Review and the Garbett Book. Quote, "The heavy blue chain of the sea didst thou, O just man, endure." Taliesin. At St. Louis they say that there is no difference between a boy and a man. As soon as a boy is that high as the table, he contradicts his father. At Oxford they lock up the young men every night. This is the end of journal collection number 43 in the 10-volume journals of Ralph Waldo Emerson. This particular journal collection dates from 1852, when the author was 49 years old. Thank you for listening.